Good. We are really glad for your decision to join us on our 26th in this virtual sphere for Birzeit University under the title, When Will the Smile Return to Our World? In spite of the difficulty that the world is facing, we really want to welcome you today. Avoid any difficulties such as poor connectivity. We will limit participation to our team and keynote speakers and the interpreters. The rest, you can follow us through the live streaming on our YouTube channel or our Facebook page. You'll find two streams, one in Arabic and one in English, so that you don't have to keep switching. As for the speakers in Zoom, then you can hear the translation through the interpretation, then English. This way, you will listen to the translation regardless of how it is. Or maybe you can switch off the translation and then the translators will be sending you the instructions. Your participations or your comments by sending your comments and feedback to our chat inbox or through our email, and then we will be responding to your mail. Later on, or for 3 days, we will be witnessing and discussing what the world is going on, because there is a conviction that the world is about to enter a new stage in diagnosing and dealing with the current circumstances and looking for the future. Together, we will listen to the best speakers led by the president of Birzeit University, who has been leading the way. I invite Dr. Abdelatif Abu Hajli to welcome everyone and to inaugurate the conference.
شكرا. إن شاء الله الابتسامة تعود للجميع قريبا.
Hopefully the smile will return to everyone soon.
حضرات المتحدثات والمتحدثين في المؤتمر.
In our conference.
الحضور الكرام.
Dear guests.
أسعد الله مساءكم بكل خير وسلامة.
Good evening.
أهلا وسهلا بكم في الفضاء الافتراضي لجامعة بيرزيت. حيث نتجاوز الجائحة ونفتتح معكم مؤتمر معهد مواطن للديمقراطية وحقوق الإنسان السنوي السادس والعشرين الذي يحمل عنوان متى تعود الابتسامة إلى عالمنا. ترى جامعة بيرزيت نفسها خلية تعمل بكل طاقاتها على ما من شأنه تحقيق سعادة البشر ليس اليوم فقط بل ومنذ تأسيسها، ويشمل ذلك إنتاج المعرفة ومساندة المجتمع في مشاريعه في مشاريعه التحررية. وخلال الأشهر المنصرمة وجدت جامعتنا نفسها في تجربة أثبتت لنا أوجه الشبه بين الوباء والاستعمار. فاضطررنا كما اضطرت غالبية الجامعات في العالم إلى هجر حرمنا الجامعي، وهي تجربة كانت خاصة في فلسطين، حيث اعتادت سلطات الاحتلال على إغلاق الحرم الجامعي أو قطع الطريق عنه، والذي كنا نقاومه بالإصرار على استمرار الحياة الجامعية الأكاديمية والمجتمعية بشتى الوسائل المتاحة فينا. وهذه التجربة اليوم تجربة عالمية فرضتها الجائحة التي سنقاومها أيضا بشتى الوسائل المتاحة. وسنصل إلى يوم ترتسم فيه الابتسامة على وجوهنا. المحاور التي يطرحها المؤتمر للنقاش في غاية الأهمية لصعوبة وحساسية الأوضاع التي يمر بها العالم بشكل عام، وفلسطين على وجه الخصوص. فقضية استقطاب الثروة تمسنا كل يوم، فطلابنا وعائلاتهم يكابدون في سبيل لقمة العيش في حين تصرف الدولة التي تحتلنا على جيشها المحتل أكثر من إجمالي ناتجنا القومي، ذلك لأنها بهذه التكلفة تقوم بنهب وحجز مواردنا، ثم يقولون إننا نرفض السلام. إلى أي درب وصل عالمنا الذي تجلى فيه الصفات محل الأمم المتحدة، الذي تحل فيه الصفقات الذي تحل فيه الصفقات محل الأمم المتحدة، ويطلب منا الأقوياء فيه أن ندفع فاتورة قهرهم لنا. نحن حقا نرغب في عالم يتمكن فيه طلابنا من رسم البسمة على وجوههم، في عالم لا فيه عن الالتحاق بالجامعة وعالم الأولوية فيه للتغلب على الوباء ولتحقيق الحرية وليس لقهر الشعوب ولا لعبادة المال. تطرقت في مؤتمر معهد مواطن السنوي الماضي إلى قضية بطالة الشباب الخريجين، واليوم بعد مرور سنة تقريبا أجد نفسي أتساءل عن مستقبل شعب فلسطين برمته، بل عن العالم بأسره. وآمل أن يسهم هذا المؤتمر في نقاش الأدوات والآليات التي من شأنها أن تبدد الغيمة القائمة التي
that can end this dark cloud that is gathering around in our sky. And so this conference has become an annual tradition
لن تتحقق إلا
in discussing
وبالعالم البلايين لإنتاج السلاح
important issues in order to achieve happiness
ولم
and freedom.
يستطع لتاريخه، وهذا عيب على البشرية وعلى الكون الذي نعيش فيه. نصرف تحديث الأسلحة لقتل البشر، ولكن لتاريخه لن نستطع إنتاج لقاح أو علاج لهزيمة هذا الوباء الذي يفتك بالبشرية. فما معنى إنتاج السلاح في هذه الأيام؟ نحن بحاجة وبأمس الحاجة إلى الحفاظ على صحة البشر والاستثمار في التعليم والبحث العلمي للحفاظ على الصحة البشرية، وليس لإنتاج السلاح كما هو في وقتنا الحالي. ذات مؤتمر مواطن السنوي تقليدا يجسد القناعة بضرورة طرح القضايا الفكرية والهموم المحلية والعربية والعالمية للنقاش العام، وهي قناعة بأن العمل والفكر مرتبطان، وبأن الجامعة والمجتمع شريكان، وبأن قضايانا واحدة وإن اختلفت سبل مقاربتها. يشكل هذا المؤتمر برهانا على أن الجامعة تطلع بدورها في كل ظرف، وأن ذلك منبعه رؤيتها لدورها ومسؤوليتها، ويشكل احتضان المجتمع الفلسطيني للجامعة شرطا لنجاحها في دورها ولقدرتها على تحقيق رسالتها ولقدرتها على الاستدامة وعلى صون استقلالها، ويشكل سندا أساسيا لوجهتها الوطنية والإنسانية. أرى في المشاركين في هذا المؤتمر نخبة من الأكاديميين المرموقين، ويسعدني وجودكم بيننا. إننا نرى في التواصل مع زملائنا في أنحاء العالم قيمة مركزية في حياتنا الأكاديمية، ونحن نرى فيه تكاملاً وتضامناً مهنياً وأممياً، وكلاهما ضروري لنتمكن من مواجهة التحديات والعراقيل التي يصنعها الظرف الاستعماري الذي نعيش. اسمحوا لي أن أرحب بشكل خاص بضيوفنا المشاركين في هذا المؤتمر من خارج فلسطين. إننا نجد في مساهماتكم تجسيداً لتضامنكم معنا وغذاء لنمونا بتجاوز المحن، ونأمل أن نستضيفكم في جامعتنا في الواقع غير الافتراضي في أقرب فرصة ممكنة إن شاء الله. ختاماً، أرحب بكم جميعاً مرة أخرى، متمنياً لكم التوفيق في مؤتمركم، ومطلعاً إلى إسهامكم، آملاً أن يكون حواركم مثمراً، وأن تكون استخلاصاتكم بناءة، وآمل أن ينجح هذا المؤتمر في فتح النقاش واسعاً وعميقاً حول القضايا المدرجة على جدول أعمالكم. وفقكم الله إن شاء الله، والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. وشكراً لحسن.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Abdulatif, for this speech that covered all the areas of the conference. Since the establishment of Muwatin Institute, the Institute management has been always keen on focusing on the achievement, on institutionalizing the achievement of this institute and its identity. We are still on the beginning of our path, and much hope. I invite Dr. Mudar, Kassis, the director of Muwatin Institute. The floor is yours, sir.
and an educational crisis. On top of this came a series of announcements regarding international agreements on security alliances called a peace agreement, the protagonists of which are imperialist Zionists and Arab reactionaries. And the essence of it is to uphold the law of the jungle over the international law, to overrule regional agreement, grant the colonizer an instrument of forgiveness, and to direct to our people along with a yellow smile that reveals what they believe in, which is victory of money over struggle. It was natural that protests and remarks from a number of genuine friends of our institute inquiring about the question that asked about the return of the smile as a title we chose for this conference. And I decided to postpone the answer until today. Yes, we still aspire to come to a time when the smile will return. That smile on the faces at the end of the bloody war, and upon achieving a great accomplishment as happened after the evacuation of French occupation forces from Algeria, or the victory of the Vietnamese revolutionaries over the aggressive American armies, or the nationalization of the Suez Canal, or when the Palestinian people liberate, and when we conquer the coronavirus. I would have liked personally to choose another title for this conference. However, I refrained from this suggestion due to some possible concerns of my colleagues and our guests. The title that came to my mind was a quotation from the second part of Marx's famous 11th thesis, which said, "But the problem is to change it." That means changing the world. And I think that this quote speaks well of the topic of our conference. Although I believe that the key issue today is changing the world, I also believe that the need to explain it still exists. Therefore, I would suggest to you that we try in this conference to contribute to explaining what happened to us with a clear aim of changing the reality. There is an imminent danger in the goal of that change that I'm calling for. And it is one of the dangers that the right and the left meet in their formation. Whoever works to change according to plans and mechanisms that are paid for by the majority of society without its elites is committing an immoral act. However, the goal of changing the reality today must be moral. Therefore, I'm actively calling for the immersion in the process of change, to move to practical criticism, that is, to participate in the process of change, instead of contenting ourselves with the objection and blame. The minority, which benefits from the current world situation, will fiercely defend its survival. A lot of tools and ingredients for that, as long as they use them to reach the state the world is in now. They are the same tools they use to maintain and enhance their status, but they do not have the most important resources, without which their tools become worthless. The people who make up the majority that are necessary to provide those assets that are owned by the few beneficiaries. Here comes the role of the intellectuals, where the transition to practical criticism is the embodiment of the idea of an organic intellectual who behaves professionally, moving from commenting on events to the level of designing and implementing it. This requires a rebellion against the discourse promoted, dictated, and supported by the dominant elites, which is called rhetoric discourse. This rhetoric discourse has narrowed to such an extent that it has become so stifling that it has become the same as the mouse. In the new liberal era, it became extreme. It is remarkable that what is being defined as discipline within the discourse had been becoming narrower, less diverse, and steadily shifting to the right for several decades. The nationalist right, particularly in the new Nazi tendencies, was seen as an unacceptable extremism in Europe in the 1980s. And today it is a right-wing position that forms part of views that have a legitimate share of politics. On the contrary, the commercial and cultural boycott of South Africa during the apartheid regime was a dominant status in Europe, while the call for boycott of Israeli goods today is a crime. Let us have a look at the option that today's discourse puts before us: death by a disease or death from hunger. For some reason, the use of the accumulated financial resources of a few people, 26 of whom of them own half of the planet's wealth, I say using it to enable workers, small traders, service providers, or those who live to work by the day, and others to avoid the epidemic, is out of the question. Even the development of such an idea for discussion is extreme and perhaps even violent. We are suffocating in the vast space of neuralization and globalization, suffocating from creativity, empowerment, opportunity, and excellence. It turned out to be that these are promises that could be the reminiscence of Mussolini and Hitler's promises of jobs, national pride, and denial of class conflict. Isn't this what the latest version of new liberal leaders embodies? Isn't that their promises? They promise to take neoliberalism to its fascist peak. They are reproducing the most horrible stages of history with the latest tools and technical capabilities. In order to avoid this black destiny, with or without black shirts, the system must be rebelled. The options for the foreseeable future are either fascism or the equality. And I don't see no third option. I have referred to the rebellion as practical criticism, which is possible, capable of advancing the process of change, whose terms can be drawn from history, from the street, from the theory, which are neither new nor complex. First, organized, targeted, vision-based, strategic, action-based action, based on which appropriate mechanisms and tactics are identified, including long-term, short-term tactical initial alliances. This means that appropriate patterns of political organization must be revived, capable of transferring legitimacy to its source, means to us. Second, abandoning moderation and giving central place in analysis and in the planning of class conflict. We must reject the slogan that says that we're all in the same boat. As many have been saying recently, we are in the same sea, but we are in different boats that vary in speed and safety. Identifying friends and enemies and building alliances require a close assessment of phenomena, manifestations, motivations, and interests. Thirdly, stop negotiating on the terms of the dominant powers. There can be no successes in the conditions imposed by these forces that are accepted, but fair conditions that must be imposed to negotiate our future. This requires abandoning the common idea that says that what we live is the terms of the game, rules of the game designed by someone and became a destiny to us. Our lives are not a game. Moreover, this game is like a casino. The guaranteed winner in its owner, and the vast majority have to lose in order for the owner to win. Fourth, we must stop accepting liberalism as an alternative to democracy. Liberalism without pluralism only means market dominance. As for true pluralism, it requires a democracy that is capable of restraining the market. This means that we strive to achieve a radical democracy, as no other system is able to stop the monopolization of money, power, politics, and sustenance. The killing of the so-called liberal left today lies in its acceptance of the rules of the game that recognize pluralism only within the scope of what is commonplace, and no one and not everyone is allowed an equal role in the scoping process. It has become evident the exclusionary and marginalizing character of the temporary liberal system. I'm sure that a number of the participants in this conference personally tried the process of silencing the voices in incubator of academic freedoms that praise their liberalism. Fifth, the response to globalized action requires global and international collective action. This is a complex issue that needs a whole conference. However, I will ask questions that frame the potential problematic of this issue. Is it possible to create a global verb by combining local verbs? Our actions? Is it possible to rely on international relations in response to the global act? Or do we need popular alliances or state coalitions? In which camp does identity politics ultimately play? Do indigenous, ethnic, racial, regional, and religious identities support or burden the global response? The sessions of this conference will address questions about the current reality, its crisis, its risks, in order to examine the opportunities and ways to overcome them and the conditions for that. And we'll discuss the future prospects and concerns related to it. I will not take more of your time to present what is included in the conference concept paper, its program and summaries that will be presented therein. They are available in the conference booklet in both languages on the conference website. Again, to reference background paper about the inequality status in the world. Allow me to welcome you as speakers to this in the conference, participants in the discussions and observers of its work. I begin by welcoming our guests from outside the Arab world, from outside Palestine, from outside Birzeit University, and from within, ending with the Muwatin Institute team and its associates who have worked hard to make this conference successful in these extraordinary circumstances. I would like to mention in particular, on behalf of my colleagues and people, our sincere gratitude to those who did not hesitate to accept the invitation to participate in the works of this conference, because they feel that this contribution in part is a declaration of solidarity of a humanitarian character. It is this solidarity that makes us believe that the hope for a smiling world is built on solid foundations. In conclusion, please note that we examined the possibility of providing coffee and pastries via the cyberspace, but we did not succeed. So the usual hospitality in the conferences of Muwatin remains on us. Thank you very much. Thank you, Dr. Mudar. Yes, it is a very heavy and rich conference. We, in this geographical area that is limited in space, we're not isolated in a cave. Even if we were, we have a big reserve as actors. We are interactive with the world space, and we have alliances that we solidify with. I present to you now Dr. Vijay Prashad, Tri-Continental Director and one of the leaders of New Liberalism. He will tell us more the agenda of the South region after the pandemic. I would like here to say that this speech will be in English. Whoever would like to change the icon of interpretation, you can do this. Using Zoom, you need, please, if you want to listen to it in English. Okay, the floor is yours, Dr. Vijay.
Okay, first, President Abdul Latif, it's very nice to be with you at Birzeit, even if it's, you know, in a virtual manner. Mudar, thanks for your opening remarks. They were fantastic and exactly along the grain of everything I think. Although I'm going to say something about Marx in a minute, and that exact line from the Feuerbach thesis. So I'll come back to that in a minute. Rana Barakat, thank you so much for harassing me to answer emails. It's unfortunate that I can't be with you in Ramallah. It hurts because I would like to be there to embrace all of you. George, your institute is still going strong. So 3 cheers for Muwatin Institute of Democracy and Human Rights. Congratulations. It's a great honor to be here with you. Today, friends, is the death anniversary of one of the great giants of Palestine, Edward Said. Edward Said, you may remember, died today in 2003. It's an important thing to talk about Said for a minute, because the imperialists have put so much pressure to erase Palestine from the world since 2003. I think even Edward would have been surprised maybe by the extent of pressure. this ridiculous deal of the century, you know, the way in which they, without much global pushback, are driving an agenda on behalf of the Israelis. This requires from us consistent thought and action. There are lots of problems in the world, the pandemic not the least of them. But I don't think that the question of emancipation of Palestine should be forgotten. Whether it's in the middle of COVID or post-COVID, we have to insist in keeping the question of Palestinian emancipation on the agenda. And as these far-right governments, Modi in India, Bolsonaro in Brazil, as these governments start to define the global South, we have to make sure that people's movements must not let them define our attitude to Palestinian liberation. So that's the first point. I want to make 8 points about this pandemic. The first point, which we should focus on, is the assault on humanity. Yesterday, the International Labour Organization released a very disturbing report. It showed that workers and peasants around the world have lost 3.5 trillion US dollars of income in the last 6 months. That's about 11% of global income. The poorer countries, workers, lost 15% of income. I mean, this is a catastrophe for working people. Because money is less in the hands of working people, they are consuming less. And in the lack of consumption comes the lack of eating. As Mudar pointed out, hunger rates have gone up. We have enough food in the planet, by the way. The problem with capitalism is that it's not that there's a lack of food, but that the working people don't have money to buy the food. Money is the barrier to eating. The first thing we have to insist upon is to drive an agenda for immediate income support for working people around the planet. and immediate delivery of food to 2 billion hungry people. That's the first point. The second point, the destruction of the small shopkeeper and business person. You see, in a normal situation, capitalism wipes out small shopkeepers, small business people. The International Labour Organization shows that as a result of the pandemic, 436 million small enterprises face high risk of serious disruption. In many parts of the world, there is a shift to platform capitalism. People are buying goods and services from the web. They are ignoring small businesses. It's very important for credit support for small businesses to be fought for at this time. That's the second point. The third point is that there has been, as a consequence of the lockdown, an incredible increase in patriarchal violence. You see, women do about 80 to 90% of housework. And increasingly, as people are at home because of the pandemic, women's role in the care economy has increased. This means in the healthcare economy, nurses and doctors and medical practitioners, this means teaching their children at home, holding families together, and so in the middle of this immense pressure on women workers around the world comes the patriarchal violence. Any agenda for the global south has to take this up immediately. Any agenda for the global south must take this up immediately. Number 4, the attack on democracy. You see, taking advantage of COVID-19 pandemic, governments around the world have been minimizing democracy quite dramatically. In India, for instance, the government has basically withdrawn labor laws. And a few days ago, the government passed 3 bills undemocratically against farmers and agricultural workers. In Brazil, in South Africa, the government is evicting poor people from their homes. From Bolivia to Thailand, we see coup d'etats being sanctified, elections being delayed. As you know, in the middle of all this, they are trying to do regime change in Venezuela, in Iran. Political activists are being killed in Colombia, in South Africa. And you well know the pressure on Palestine has increased, as I mentioned earlier. So we are seeing democratic processes in the global south in particular being crushed. They are using the pandemic to crush democratic processes. And this has to be addressed in any post-COVID world. We have to fight to win back basic rights of people, which are being taken away during the pandemic. The right of labor, for instance, rights of farmers and so on, being taken away under cover of the pandemic. Number 5, they are using the environmental crisis and the pandemic basically to save capitalism. They are not transitioning us to a new kind of energy necessarily. From the West, we hear about the Green New Deal, for instance. The Green New Deal sounds wonderful. They want to use the pandemic to put some of this forward. They want to use public funding to pay energy companies to transition from carbon to clean energy. But how clean is this energy? Solar power, hydraulic, all of them rely on batteries. If you need batteries, you need cobalt, you need indium, you need lithium. For cobalt, you have in the Congo, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, you have labor crushed by European mining companies like Glencore, which are utilizing labor and paying them almost nothing in the Democratic Republic of Congo, destabilized by war and so on. The principal place from which cobalt comes is the Congo. The principal place where lithium comes is Chile, Argentina, and Bolivia. And you saw they made the coup d'etat in Bolivia. So this transition to the green energy is not that clean. It relies on child labor in Congo. It relies on coup d'etats in Bolivia. And it relies on public financing to subsidize private companies. It's another good place to make the argument for a public sector energy transition where workers in the Congo, workers in Bolivia are well paid for their work. Nobody's saying don't bring the cobalt out of the copper mines. Bring it out. But pay the Congo and the Congolese workers fair wages. Don't overthrow the government of our brother Evo Morales in Bolivia. Why should you do a Green New Deal on the backs of the indigenous people of Bolivia? So the 5th point is we should not allow this Green New Deal to take place on the backs of workers in the global south. Number 6, they are using this pandemic crisis to build up pressure against China. The big new Cold War against China. United States government is pretending to be the defender of Muslims. You know, talking about the Uyghurs in Xinjiang. This is the United States government. This is Michael Pompeo, who wants to destroy Iran. This is the government that destroyed Iraq. This is the government that overthrew a government in Libya. This is a government that wants to even further destroy Syria. This is a government that wants to erase Palestine. This is a government that continues its war in Afghanistan. And suddenly they turn around and say to us, we are for the Muslims of Xinjiang province in China. Come on. If you believe this, you've lost your mind. What is the real issue with China? The real issue with China is that China has developed a very sophisticated high-tech industry, particularly in telecommunications and robotics. The company Huawei and ZTE are much advanced than American telecommunications or even Nokia and so on. They are providing 5G technology to the world at much better rates and a higher quality of 5G. The United States knows that if China leapfrogs and becomes the major power to provide 5G technology, GPS technology, etc., that China will have a 1 or 2 generational advantage over American telecommunication companies. To prevent this, because they can't compete commercially, they are using imperialist pressure against China, an information war, and then warships in the South China Sea, threatening China with a war. Also, attempting to break China's relations with the rest of the world in its economic development. I was looking at the numbers recently. American economy is tanked in the pandemic. Its ability to buy goods is much reduced. China is one of the only countries whose economy is growing again. Why would countries around the world want to integrate more with the US economy and break with the Chinese? You'd have to be crazy to do that. Let me ask you a question in Palestine. How many American doctors came to Palestine to give you information about COVID-19 and how to deal with the pandemic? None. The Chinese have sent medical teams to Palestine in the last 3 months to train medical personnel dealing with COVID-19. So for the global South, the question of how to understand China must be part of the next agenda as we develop an agenda out of COVID-19. We should not get sucked into the Cold War between the United States and China. 2 more quick points. Number 7, public health. This pandemic has proved without a doubt that we, everywhere around the planet, we need public sector health systems. We do not need private healthcare. The whole world should now understand the importance of a public health sector health system. I want to say a few words about the vaccine being developed. You see, they are trying to make the vaccine a private matter, private companies developing it and so on. We should not allow this to happen. The UN AIDS agency is fighting to create a people's vaccine. But the issue is not just releasing information about the vaccine online. Frankly, in the global South, we are at a disadvantage. Most countries, except India and some others, have no capacity to make pharmaceutical drugs. Even if they put the COVID-19 vaccine formula online for free, even if they do that, most countries cannot produce the vaccine. They don't have factories. You'll remember in 1998, the United States bombed one of the main factories in Sudan, the Al-Shifa pharmaceutical factory. You may remember this. Some may remember this. Because Bill Clinton was in the middle of a scandal with Monica Lewinsky that they bombed a pharmaceutical factory in Khartoum. Sudan till today doesn't have the capacity to build its own pharmaceutical industry. By the way, United States has never rebuilt the factory till today. So we need to build the capacity. We need to build the capacity for pharmaceutical production. And this needs to be a public sector venture. United Nations must come in to assist countries in building their either national pharmaceutical capacity or regional pharmaceutical capacity. We can see the Arab world building a regional pharmaceutical capacity, which is not available today. Courier companies have said that they don't have the refrigeration capacity to mail the COVID-19 vaccine around the world. Even if they develop a vaccine, how will you get it in Palestine? The courier companies can't bring it to you because they don't have the refrigeration capacity. Do you in Palestine have the pharmaceutical capacity to produce the vaccine? That's a question people need to ask right now. We need to be fighting to build public sector pharmaceutical capacity now. We shouldn't wait. The last point. I joined with a group of people, including the former president of Brazil, Dilma Rousseff, the finance minister of Kerala, T.M. Thomas Isaac, foreign minister of Venezuela, Jorge Areza, the former finance minister from Greece, Yanis Varoufakis. We signed a statement together calling for the cancellation of the debt. Currently, the external debt from the global south is about $11 trillion. This should be completely cancelled. See, you can't, if you take my 7 points before, you can't provide income support. You can't build pharmaceutical capacity. You can't do all this if you're still paying your debt servicing payments. The rich people in tax havens have hidden $32 trillion. Our external debt is 1/3 of their tax haven, amounts of money they've hidden. Our external debt must not be suspended. There must not be a haircut. It must be totally cancelled. We need a global movement in the global south to demand total cancellation of the debt. This is what Fidel Castro called for in 1983. And this is what we need to be demanding today. We cannot move any agenda if the debt crisis continues. Friends, I have laid out 8 points. I want to end again because Mudar brought up Marx. I want to end with Marx. He cited the 11th thesis of Feuerbach. Philosophers until now have interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. I want to revise Marx's thesis on Feuerbach, if you allow me. It's okay to revise Marx once in a while. This is how I understand research. And this is what I think institutes like Tricontinental, where I work, Mutawareen, where you are, George, which you founded. Our approach should be like what Marx is saying, but different. I always tell our researchers, if you don't want to change the world, you can't understand it. It's a slight revision of Marx's slogan. If you don't want to change the world, you can't understand it. If you don't understand the fact, if you don't appreciate the fact that we are living always in a process of change, you can't understand the dynamic of change. You see, calling for the cancellation of debt is the only way to understand the debt crisis. I'm not interested in a better methodology to calculate the debt. I don't think that's going to help us. We have to start with the premise that we have to change the world. If we start with that premise, then we know that the debt crisis, the enormous external debt in our countries, is preventing any thought of policy that produces outcomes that help our people. Our countries are only worried about wealthy bondholders in the Paris and London group. We should demand that our governments don't start with worrying about bondholders. They need to start with worrying about their own people. Our governments are governments of wealthy bondholders from abroad. They need to change their attitude. If you don't believe you can change the world, you shouldn't be in government. If you don't believe you can change the world, you should not enter politics. If you don't believe you can change the world, we will never smile again. We will smile because we believe we can change the world. We will smile because we understand the world, because we want to change it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Dr. Vijay Prashad. With this, we'll have concluded the opening speeches, and we will move now to the first session that will be chaired by Dr. Mudar of Kassis. And please stick to the time limited in this agenda. Again, on behalf of Muwatin staff, we welcome you again in this conference, and I wish you all fruitful and beautiful sessions. Okay, so the floor is yours, Dr. Mudar. Welcome to you again. The first session in this conference will be titled by manifestations of the crisis in the Arab world. As you remember, the cores of this axis of this conference: why are we living? Where is the crisis? What are the capacities to get out of this crisis? What are the necessary tools and capable tools to get out of this crisis? And then go to where, what dimension, which direction, and how. In the first session, we have two speakers. Héla Yousfi from Tunisia. She's a Tunisian that she teaches in France. She's specialized in sociology. And the other speaker is Dalal El-Bizri. Dalal is from Beirut, globalized. He lived in Cairo and is in Canada now. And now she's a journalist, but her history comes from sociology. Her background is sociology in Lebanon. So we'll start with Héla. Héla has worked a lot on unions, Tunisian unions and labor unions. She studied the conversions after the Tunisian revolution, and she has a very prominent articles and a book that was issued by her. And within this struggle of dignity, sovereignty, and liberation, there's a question about the nation, the homeland. It's a necessity, and it is limiting. So this is the question that Héla will raise today in her about the. So Héla, the floor is yours. Just please unmute.
والجواب ليست أوتوبيك، ليست طوبوية. سأبدأ أولاً أريد أن أشكر معهد مواطن للديمقراطية وحقوق الإنسان على هذه الدعوة للمشاركة في مؤتمر مواطن السنوي السادس والعشرون. وقبل تقديم مداخلتي وكعضو في الحملة الشعبية في تونس ضد التطبيع والمقاطعة، أريد أن أؤكد تضامننا الكامل مع الشعب الفلسطيني ومساندتنا الكاملة لكل التحركات الشعبية في البحرين وفي كل البلاد العربية ضد القرارات المستبدة بفرض بعض الأنظمة الحاكمة العربية التطبيع مع الاستعمار الصهيوني على شعوب المنطقة. أريد أن أذكر أن هذا ليس تضامنا فقط مع القضية العادلة للشعب الفلسطيني، ولكن إيمانا منا بأن المشروع الصهيوني يهدد كل مشروع تحرك سياسي واقتصادي في كل بلاد المنطقة. في هذه المداخلة سأركز على موضوع مهم، وهو دلالة الرجوع إلى السيادة الوطنية في أجندة الحركات الاجتماعية. بعد قرابة 10 سنوات من اندلاع الثورات العربية لم يجد بعض المطلبين الرئيسيين. الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام وشغل الحرية كرامة وطنية اللذين رفعا من تونس إلى دمشق مرورا بالبحرين والجزائر ترجمتهما السياسية الاقتصادية والاجتماعية. قدمت أطروحات كثيرة داخلية وإقليمية لتفسير هذه الصعوبات، غير أن هذين الشعارين اللذين استهدفا الدولة وجعل منها في نفس الوقت مسؤولة عن المشاكل وفي نفس الوقت مسؤولة أيضا عن إيجاد حلول، بوصفها مشغلا وضامنا للسيادة الوطنية. هذه المفارقة التي يصعب نفيها أو حصرها أنتجت أطروحات تحليلية تبسيطية. قراءة تختزل المسار الثوري في رهانات التحرر السياسي والاقتصادي في مقابل قراءة أخرى تركز على دور الدولة في إدارة المشاكل الاقتصادية والسياسية. لكن لا تصمد هذه الأطروحات أمام الواقع وتطرح سؤالين أساسيين: ما دلالة عودة السيادة الوطنية في الأجندة السياسية للدول العربية في منطقة تشهد حروبا وإصلاحات نيوليبرالية عديدة؟ هل ما زالت الدولة وأي نوع من الدولة أي صنف من الدول تمثل موضوع تحليل ملائم لفهم الواقع الراهن؟ وخاصة هل تمتلك الدولة المفككة في جميع المنطقة موارد سياسية اقتصادية ورمزية حتى تستجيب لمطالب التحرر الذي تمد به كل شعوب المنطقة؟ في الواقع أن أظهرت الثورات العربية أن الاقتصادات الوطنية تعاني من نفس المشاكل الهيكلية مثل التركيز على عدد قليل من القطاعات ذات القيمة المضافة الضئيلة، نسب بطالة من بين الأعلى في العالم، إدارة ريعية للموارد وفساد موجه ومنظم من قبل الأوليغارشيات العشائرية في السلطة، فإنها سلطت الضوء على ظاهرة كثيرا ما يقلل من أهميتها تتمثل في تلاقي المنطق النيوليبرالي مع الممارسة الزبونية والسلطوية للحكم. الدولة تبقى أداة لتنفيذ السياسات النيوليبرالية في المنطقة، وهذا ما يجعل هناك العديد من قواسم مشتركة بين مجموعة الدول ما بعد الاستعمارية في المنطقة العربية. ولمزيد من فهم التحديات المطروحة على الأنظمة العربية يبدو لي أنه من الضروري تبني منظور مزدوج. من ناحية لا يمكن فهم تاريخ تكوين الدولة في المنطقة دون إعادة تحديد موقع تأثير التاريخ الاستعماري على الحركات الشعبية داخل حدود الدولة وخارجها. ومن ناحية أخرى من الضروري الكشف عن أبعاد والتداعيات مشروع الإضعاف الممنهج للدول العربية عبر الحروب العنيفة أو الإضعاف الناعم مثل مختلف الإصلاحات الهيكلية المفروضة من طرف الجهات الدولية المانحة. فيما يلي سأحاول أن أبين أنه حتى لو لم تستطع الدولة أن تشكل أداة لتغيير اجتماعي تحرري، فبالنسبة لي من ضروري أن نفهم تاريخ النضالات حول الدولة وكيف هذا التاريخ يمكن أن يؤثر على توازن القوى بين الطبقات الاجتماعية ويحدد كذلك شروط العمل السياسي والتحولات الاجتماعية في المنطقة. وقبل كل شيء يجب أن نرجع
democratic bureaucratic power, or it's from the Marxist perspective, social relationships related to class relation developments. These comparatives are uprooted in the European history. If the institutionalization of this structure of these national states is very integrated, and that have happened in Europe, that is compatible with all the collective patterns, it means that in Arab countries, the borders that have been imposed by the Sykes-Picot in 16th of May do not align with the perspectives of or the liberating perspectives of people, which has led to paths that are opposing and that are ambiguous. Countries that are integrated, like Tunisia and Egypt and Algeria, and populations like look for forming their own status, like Palestinians and the Polisario desert people, or even disfragmented groups like in Lebanon after the national war in 1975. The countries have inherited after the independence two economic structures. One is a capitalist that is dominating in the industry, and the other that is being formed by the colonial scheme, and which a new elite power has inherited, and another one which is bureaucratic state that is the military pattern in order and also was preserved by the local elites in order to dominate the rich peoples, like and which will dominate the clan identities or the alternative ethnicity, like barbarians in Morocco, Kurds in Syria and Iraq, and Shiites in Bahrain, which will continue to challenge these people. And so this is the history of these countries, and according to Naziha Ayyubi, which means that these are fierce states, which means that their apparatus, the security apparatus, was inherited from the colonization, and also kept the clans and tribal systems, and also has the local fragmentation. So these countries, and I would like to focus here, these countries were fierce, and were the keys to all liberal reforms, and these states still as structures have these distortions, structural distortions that are inherited from their upbringing, and also in addition to the absence of narrative, or in order to filtrate into the society, and which is the only that guarantee building a pivotal relationship between the policies of taxes and to be participating in the political decision. So this is one of the main issues that we need to tackle. This has led to different comparatives in order to form the state in the Arab region. One of these comparatives deals with the state as a separate entity that is imported and that is dominant. That this is and which and this reading thinks of many issues related to it, like history and so on. However, the Marxist reading prefers to analyze the formation of a state based on basics of the capital accumulation in these societies. So this, and here I want to confirm that the state is still the war ground, where the strategies of are in the hands of the powers and of the authority in order to be formed according to their agenda. As happened in Lebanon, there's a whole nation that demands to end the Ta'if. And we've seen how the French President Macron have ran to France in order to reform, to maintain the coalition with these elites. So we feel that the Arab country is just that needs to be examined through its different ideological and socio systems, taking into consideration the variation of the struggles, processes that and the conflicts that are within the state apparatuses. As for the Arab revolutions, have demanded to come down with the system and not the state, and so these Arab revolutions did not only lead to the demolition of the systems, but also to get out of the system that have raised the question between the countries. This demand has wanted to have a state from the different social popular groups, like to have a secular state in Lebanon to liberate or to unify the liberation movement in Lebanon, or the public sector in Tunisia. So ATV in Tunis was raised in the public general strike in Tunisia, and the national in reply to of the privatization of the public sector. Despite these differences, structural differences, however, the message is one: it's to get out of the political situation and the economic inheritance from the West. But the situation is very similar everywhere, and every state looks to get rid of the of these distortions and to rebuild its system, to have to work on its resources and to liberate its people. However, the only way that is suggested by the donors is still the same. It's to enhance the democracy with the new liberal, which also focuses on the narrative, and to support, which is to support the less in as Asian. Now, in the debate of decentralization and all this attack on the new liberal attack, the system of decentralization scheme takes different forms. It depends on the state, which imposes through or systems through the war in Iraq and Syria. For instance, in Syria, there's the rearrangement for the political sphere and regional sphere, and through the sharing the resources between the different sects, which means that the rich will become richer and the poor will suffer from more poverty and isolation. In all cases, this decentralization presents a scheme that presents a new era of the defragmentation and liberalization of economy. This comes in line with this fragmentation of activating the ethno-religious identities, and so this idea had been the national sovereignty has become old in all ways, and at the same time the structural the social struggles that have come out of these that have generated from these Arab revolutions have been exposed to more competitiveness from new social movements, which does not only focus on mobilizing the individuals, but about division of fortunes, which focuses on the rights and liberties, social liberties, and so on. So Tunisia have seen a big amount of a new generation of NGOs that interfere directly and indirectly in supporting the struggles of certain categories like women's, or to combat racism and cultural pluralism, and like the these new liberal reforms has been adopted previously by the West, as analyzed by Nancy Franzer about the identity of politics. However, it was imposed by Arab countries and international institutions. And what is the goal about this? It's to keep the social, the political print of collective identity, and to impose the dominancy of the market in the Arab sphere. And maybe the international companies that are related to the authoritative families in the Gulf, and who are extracted from their people, maybe it has its separate program. For sure, this attack has annulled the path of building new states. And this history shows that these new liberal reforms need needs violence, or that the collaboration from the authoritative elites, or elites that are in power, in order to infiltrate within the societies. Accordingly, it's very important for any person who is interested in developing the economic liberal political agendas. He thinks that the state is a strategic field that can impact the economic and political dynamics, which could give a better diagnosis of the struggles within the area in a better way, and can reflect the balance of powers wherever it is, or to try to support transformation, or a rooted transformation of the state in the communist meaning, and away from this comparatives in the West between the reactionary nationalism on the one hand, and the globalization after modernization, and from the other, the national sovereignty in the way that Arab revolutions have demanded for, reminds us of the new movements that were seen at the beginning of the 20th century, without opposing the conflict against this racial discrimination and all types of discrimination, because this political system has faced challenges. It cannot be only limited to certain limitations. I mean, there should be, it's not upon the debates of social and political debates, but there should be a cultural and economic comparison. At the same time, the national states should, in the Arab countries, in the Arab region, as political and economic entities, should again maintain their identity, their function, and finally, and a question for you: will the smile return one day? I believe the smile will remain there. It is there. It is in this energy that is there, that we see in all social movements around the world, and it's also there in the slogans, the nice slogans, like the slogan that was raised in Tunisia: Tunisia is free, and its capital is Jerusalem. Thank you very much. Thank you, Héla, from Tunisia, capital Jerusalem. Okay, let's move on now to Dr. Dalal El-Bizri. I hope now you're settled in Canada. You don't feel sleepy. No, that's no, I'm fine. But I'm still jet lagged, but I'm fine. I'm fine. Okay, good that you're safe in Canada. Shall I start? I'm not a journalist, by the way. And even when I write in a journal, I don't write, I write just opinions. I'm a writer. I'm not even a sociologist. I started to, but I don't have this ambition or nor this perspective. What I want to say, and now I'm writing a book. It's now under publication. It's titled Lebanese Leftists in Their Times. It tackles 52 leftist culture. So we will follow this and how they started, and then how they work in Hezbollah and so on. So I will start until they all they confirm that they're leftists. However, each of them see the leftist concept in the left concept in their own perspective. Shall I start? Should I?
As a matter of fact, the subject that I sent you, I was unable to type it and so to read it. And I always prefer in my interventions to be committed to the time. So my intervention will be a summary to what I wrote. The first point, as I mentioned, that which is the Western retreat. The worst retreat, worst Western retreat came with the pandemic. It showed that the health allegation had no place. That is the largest and strongest country in the world, which is the most infected with this pandemic. But the pandemic or failure in the pandemic did not come out of the blue as if the West was soaring high and the pandemic came to bring it down. Before the pandemic, there were signs of retreat. The most important one, retreat in the West, which is the attraction of the elite towards forms that are sometimes novel forms of oppression, such as the tendency towards oppression, but also another point that the West started failing in, which is the values one. The values, I'm not referring here to the political values or democratic ones. Let me say the philosophical ones or the social ones. Can you follow, Mudar? Are you listening, Mudar, or reading something else? Because you are the only one in front of me. If you go, then I'll feel that I'm speaking to my laptop. No, we are with you. I can't see you. Everyone, but I'm looking at two monitors to see who's speaking on the chat. The third point, however, which is one of the signs of retreat, is the economic IT one. It's clear that the West has not economically succeeded in building a stable system that is based on justice or proportional justice so far. It has stopped or frozen somewhere. It was, escalating or growing, but stopped. And as a result, or coupled with this, it was clear that China was going up and Russia is regaining its might, if you wish. Now, who are the enemies of this West in our area? The most dynamic ones are two enemies. Are the Sunni and Shia fundamentalists. The Sunni fundamentalists were unable to create more than a case of fear, if you wish, that caused havoc so much that required a reaction to it, which restricted its expansion. Whereas the Shiite one, it has its roots and connections, and this is clear in Lebanon and Iraq, Syria, where the Shiite militias of the Iranian National Guard can impose their hegemony or control so much. In Syria, it's more complicated, but Turkey and different countries as well. The leftists, for the Sunni radicalism, they took a decision that this is an enemy to us that we can never meet with Sunni radicalism or extremism. On the other hand, with the Shiite one, they deal with more of attraction. And maybe this thing is attributed to the fact that the birth of Islamic revolution was coupled with the collapse of the leftist revolution, and those remaining leftists, they saw this Islamic revolution as rebirth for this revolution, because this revolution has a priority that is similar to theirs, which is fighting Zionism and colonialism. This thing made part of the Lebanese, Syrian, and Palestinian, and other leftists to form a major or big bloc as supporters for this. If you remember 2015, when Russians decided to enter Syria in support of Bashar al-Assad, the leftists called Putin Abu Ali Putin. And this name has several connotations, that Putin, who is Russian and coming from the Soviets, became supporter for the political Shiaism, if you wish, or Shias. Sorry, I cannot take this phone call. She's receiving a phone call. Okay. I should have muted that beforehand. So this was the first group of leftists who joined the reactionist or the position, and they became in different ways speaking about China as the utopian country coming along with signs of freedom. This is what we say about what we are saying about China is not very widespread among the leftists, but many of them, they believe in that. And just as some example of that, when the issue of pandemic in Russia, the Iranian allies, they said China did the best. Look at China, they are acting the best way in handling the pandemic, applauding and praising the Chinese experience in dealing with the pandemic compared to the failure of the West. This is the first block. There are other two groups or blocks of the leftists. They don't have the same weight as the first one. In terms of number, maybe they could be symbolic in weight more than being popular. And they are between two blocks or two directions. The first one is the leftists who entered the new liberal system and almost became preachers of that. They don't have a problem in the abuse of man to man, but still calling themselves as leftists. The third group is the all-time utopian leftist. They have their own seasonal dynamic. Their title is to revive the leftist group or re-establishing a new leftist party or develop the leftists from within. And these are experiences like the Lebanese Socialist Party, Communist Party. There's a bloc which is part of it, but still calling for reviving revolutionarism within the that party. Without that party, that socialist party, we cannot have that change. These are the three. The question now, how could the leftist in this case compared to different stages or cases of imperialism, how can they revive hope again or smile again? Allow me to read for you. I don't know, Mudar, can I read the question? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? The question, how can we couple new imperialists and traditional ones and traditional and new leftism if there is a need is to revive forces against the new regime, a new system. The current regime or system, as I described it, it's not that there is imperialism or the peoples who fight for that. There are nations that are in the decline. And there is a new imperialism that is acting as imperialist in Southeast Asia and Russia, for instance. Compared to a left that is divided into three directions. And I'm done. Finished. Thank you, Dalal. I read a lot about the left, and I'm interested in its fate, and the analysis that you spoke is extremely important for me. Since several weeks I've been thinking of this. This is a point that I forgot to say about it. That how can one be leftist and his belonging is religious or ethnic, sorry. Then let's try to be more interactive with these two presentations. I'll wait for more questions with the public. Since I am the moderator, allow me to have two questions, one for Héla and one for Dalal. I'll start with Héla. The national liberation movement across its peak time since the 50s until 80s. They were strong movements and they had their effect internationally, and they had their effect on international law, and the law and NAM was important and so forth. But these movements were born on the vision that you said as new liberal, which is the birth child of the new system and connected themselves with the new system. That's why when we speak about the Palestinian situation is where we find the state is the peak of the aspiration, not the liberation itself. Don't you see there is a major contradiction in the national liberation project with its nature and the liberation itself? Don't you see contradiction and how to resolve that? You asked me a difficult question. I don't know how to answer it, but I'll try to answer it in a clear way. First thing, as they say, maybe there is a contradiction between the vision of the state based on a nationalist ground and the liberation project that is born from a leftist project. For me, I don't see much contradiction. For me, the nations, as I said, the nationalist state in the Arab countries is a result or the outcome of ongoing imperialist projects, nothing new. We are suffering the same wars and the same neoliberalism. The new thing is that there are nations that want to rebuild the state in a way that serves their interests. So there are two levels here. The national level that is imposed on us, where we share living in this cultural and religious space. And the second one is the unity of the faith for the Arab nation. Just to cite an example, Tunis, there is an attempt to rebuild the state. We try to rebuild it on the care providing or caretaking state that takes care of the interests of the people. This project here does not contradict with the forms of struggle for the Algerians, Palestinians, or Tunisians. For me, rebuilding the state does not contradict with the idea of liberation or emancipation at different levels. the level of Arab countries and African countries, and after that, the southern countries. I don't see any contradiction between both. But the idea that there are some who say we are against the idea of state because the state cannot be a tool for social emancipation. As the state cannot be a tool for social emancipation. Because the state cannot, whether the state is strong or weak, it cannot serve the interest. If it does not serve the interests of the local or international elite, then it's subject for analysis. After that, if it is a project for a nationalist state or emancipated or liberated region, the second is my idea. And we need, at the end of the day, we need to rebuild the land carta for, in a historical context for, with its cultural specificity. This is what I wanted to say. And we have to differentiate between the national state and the national state. The national state is the 50s one. It's not a nationalist one. I mean, that is connected to the nation. The Arab liberation movements were not based on nationalist grounds. And the problem that when we notice the Arab context, when we analyze it with Western eyes, the issue of nationalism or local culture, it is an issue that needs to be discussed by the left. We cannot overcome the importance of political culture for these nations, which is totally different from the political culture in other cultures. And the same thing we see in Europe. You have European countries, they have history of wars, but they decided, because there is a unity of political and economic faith, they decided to create the European Union. And there is different historical context between France, Italy, and Germany. We notice that the political project is still facing several obstacles. I don't know if I answered the question or not. I would request you to clarify. You mentioned an important case between the national and nationalist state. What are the different features between both? For me, in order to be clear, every society has a certain identity. And the problem in the Arab countries is that there was no harmony between the state apparatuses and the ideas of the nations and their aspirations for just, I hate saying good governance, but for just governance. That every group and culture, they have their aspirations for from the state. The national state is a state that has an identity that is, I'll just give you an example. Lebanon, they have Shias, Sunnis, and different sects. All Lebanese, when they unify the idea of just ruling, all of them, they have the same aspiration. The level of cultural, of political culture is the one that sets the standard here. So that, I mean, the pluralistic identity of the state will include everyone, such as Tunis, Algeria, and Morocco, to include them all. The Algerian national state should be built on political identity for all the groups living there, religious and ethnic. So between the pluralistic and collective, the separating and collective. I separate here on the idea of political identity, which is collective for all. Cultural, political identity that defines certain aspirations for what ruling should be. This is the political identity. Collective, which is a product of certain historical context where the different sects, Arabs and non-Arabs, and the French and African impact live together to create a certain political culture. Thank you. Thanks, Alan. I believe this is a good approach that we need to focus more at a certain point, especially here in Palestine. Here I move to Dalal. Can I understand more from you, Dalal, that the issue of hostility to imperialism, especially the American one, is a phenomenon and not necessarily progressive and yes. So it is not anymore there.
And this is the interpretation for it. So, I did not see I only see the Americans. I don't see the Russians. I don't see the Chinese. So you take us back to the discourse of that's aged 100 years, which is that anti-imperialism it's not necessarily progressive. Yes, it's between the imperialism comfort powers themselves. So we are the recipients of the imperialism struggle or conflict on the ground. And I'm giving, I would like to give you an example. When Macron came to Lebanon to have his initiative, all the opposers said this is a Western or a foreign intervention. The next day, Mohammed Jawad Zarif visited, and nobody considered this as a foreign intervention because they're used to American imperialism, American. So they didn't see they didn't see that the Russians are killing the Syrians or that the Turks are competing with the Iranis over Syria. So with the effort that is needed to be exerted more, and this is something important that I need to work on. It's what are the types of new imperialisms when the Chinese, for instance, consider that the million of these Uyghur communities, and they brainwash them or they put them in concentrated camps under the Chinese nationalism or citizenship. This can be compared with how this American liberal has built its fortune on the slavery of the Indians or the indigenous. So okay, do you think that we after 120 years, are we back into this stage where we compare between the French occupation and the British occupation or colonization? Yes, you know, this discussion reminds me of 1956 when Britain, Israel, and France occupied France or invaded France, and they weren't only saved from this invasion by the States, by the US, because then the British and the French were undergoing a retreat in their powers. And the Second World War, they underwent the Marshall Project. So quickly they stopped this tripartite invasion on Egypt, and of course Egypt has conquered them politically. Okay, I would like to say the questions and you choose how you will answer them. There are questions from Shada Rami and Salsabil and Zahida Ala and some so one of the central questions was the impact of COVID-19 on the nature of the political system. It's noticed that the security force has been tightened. So will this lead to come up with a new system in a state? We think there will be a new formation of a state after the pandemic, or there will be new divisions like leftist different formations of the leftist and rightist movements in the society or in many states? The other question and a number of other questions related to after we analyze the left and its conquerness and that it's or that it has transformed to none, or that its agenda has transformed to an leftist agenda. The questions are like, have we lost hope in the left, or there's still hope, or there should be preconditions for it to survive? There is assumptions, pre-assumptions, and I think that to combat the American liberalism, we have the leftists that stand in the middle. So we're still under occupation here. So we have leftist, rightist unison against occupation. So is it still existing in this world? This trend, is it still existing throughout the world? Another question related to China and the new liberal movements in throughout the world, and different polarizations. So there are many polars here, and as we look now, the situation is before the First World War, or are we? Is it like before the First World War, or we're in different status? Another question is about the popularism, and I would like to hear it twice. Do you believe that the Shia discourse is different? How do you see this? So it's the populist. How do you see it? Ala's question is maybe more to Héla. It's about the state as an object. But we have it in our conscious, not as a structure, but we will form it. How can we analyze it? We design something, we then analyze it objectively. So again, and I will read the question. There is a claim that it's difficult sometimes to understand the formation of a state because as if it does not exist as it should. Like it's more of a statue. And so it's important to understand that its legitimacy is the task of the state itself to prove it. And I believe that is it to move from the metaphysic to on the account of the anthropology. So it needs an anthropologic analyst. I read it as it is. It is a very complicated philosophical question, but it has three components. It's the first, the state is as a structure in our conscious that's not tangible, also the legitimacy of the state, and then the third, what is the best entry to address this state? We'll start with Dalal to answer these questions however you see fit. And you want me to answer the question of the populist question? The question that has to do with populist? I forgot the question was. There's the future of the left. Yeah. We should not deny that in our days, when during the best times of the leftists, we were populist as well. We not everybody knows that you know that you're a leftist. It's been there since in the 60s and 70s, when it was like the high time of prime time of the leftist movements, and then it didn't need to be populist or to be promoted as a populist. It had, but Hezbollah did not create populist. It has inherited it, and the way it's mobilized, that is based on instigating discrimination and dreams and hopes and promises that it's going to be the state, the upcoming state will be heaven itself. So maybe now it's more strong because populist is an epidemic among all states. So it's Trump has it, and all the enemies ahead. So what will the leftists do? Well, what was the question about the leftists? Is there a future for the leftist movements? Is there a future in the first place before thinking about? So that we were happy, and that we win the war. We're not winning yet. We're smiling. There are other things in the world. We need to think that our happiness, the political happiness, and when there is this frustration, political distraction, this leads us to this despair. To me, I don't see a future. I can't see a future. A future in Lebanon, and so how can this fragmented countries that does not have any sovereignty, that does not have its own decision and own its own decision? I don't know about the in October when we did these demonstrations, and we were able to manifest, and then what next? What happened? What happened? We were revolutionary, but no, everything vanished. Everything has evaporated. So all these that who are claiming that our party is the stronger and so on, it's not in their own hands. The decision is not in their own hands. It looks like those who are taking the decisions are not really taking. They're not, in fact, taking the decisions. So so if America didn't have this fight with Iran, do you think this would have happened in Lebanon? So things went wrong because the things are wrong between them in the first place. So let's imagine a future in general, not the future of the leftists, at least.
Thank you, Dalal. Thank you, Dalal. Héla. The question was about the effect of the pandemic and the security hold of the nations. This is nothing new. It was, I mean, there in the Arab countries even, but in Tunis there is a change. In Tunis, the state was controlling, the ruling family was ruling and controlling, and we had that police and security hold. What happened in Tunis after the revolution is a liberal democracy so far, which is missing the social dimension. And what happened with the pandemic, sure, more and stronger security hold. But in Tunis, the diagnosis should be a little bit different compared to Algeria. In Algeria, they used the pandemic to impose suffocation over the revolution. But in Tunis, considering the new parliamentarian regime and the different conflicts between the different components of the different political groups, the security hold is not as strong. This is the difference. In Tunis, the diagnosis is that of dismantling and weakening the state. It's closer to the Lebanese one compared to the Egyptian one, which is as a result of conflict between the different elites, the previous ruling one and the new elite, especially the Hizb al-Nahda. So the impact of pandemic should be specific compared to each country separately. I'd like to focus that the security hold has always been there, and be it in Algeria or in Tunis. The second question, which is important for me, which is the populism. It is a very complex and sensitive question, but I'll try to answer it in a simple way. It's more of an anthropological, philosophical, and social question. Speaking of populism in Tunis, we need to differentiate between populism and its context in the Western countries, because they were coupled with the crisis of democracy, or them as a result of social democracy. We started selling dream to the different groups, and without distancing the left here. Speaking of populism in ruling and rich countries in Germany and France, is coupled with the rise of fascism in these countries. In the Arab countries, populism should be under question, because what do we mean by populism? We started saying that populism lost every ability to analyze. Take Tunis, for instance. The most used populism to criticize other political foes, it is the left side when they face the Islamic or ISIS side. Then they say these populist groups without understanding what do they mean by populist groups. Populism in the Tunisian left, they say that a people that is unable to differentiate between their interests and the political elite that can use that. Sure, maybe others who do not agree with me, and or I do not agree with this diagnosis, with this reality. We need to Yes, yes. The term lost the ability to be analyzed because it's used to say your political foes or enemies are not educated enough or not aware enough. But in Tunis, populism is used a lot to criticize Kassis, who is the president of Tunis, because he uses the terms the people want. But Kassis does not have neither political nor economic power. So when he makes decisions such as to dismiss ambassadors or ministers because they follow the old regime, there are some groups of the left, they say he's populist. No, for me, he is not populist because he respects what is sacred for the nation. As decided by the revolution. And populist also, the term populist brings us to the discussion between the right-wing and left-wing populism, as Chantal knows, and Anna Cruz, who said that populism is good. We saw this in Latin America as well, and Argentina, that we like to summarize it as follows: populism. What is populism? It is the demand of large groups of the nation to stop the contract or relation between the ruling group and external forces, and instead to be in the service of the people. That's it. If we use populist without thinking and without analyzing the what we have, the mechanisms of this content of this speech, then we cannot understand populism. The second question, however, about populism and the legitimacy of the state, if it is legitimate or not in the Arab countries, what I wanted to say is that the state, in its current state, in the Arab societies, and I can generalize here, still it is not legitimate because it is not serve the public, the interest of the people. Because there are demands that are continuous from the Arab countries to be in serving their populist demand. That is, rebuild the state and rebuild the legitimacy of the state, because the state that is now, it is not there. There is no legitimacy neither in Tunis nor anywhere. The state is not legitimate to be accepted by the Tunisians. That's why what I wanted to analyze is what the state wants. The populists want, they want to re-establish the land charter with their strategic relation between the nation or the people and the ruling groups, instead of that relation between the ruling groups and the Western or other external forces. So the battle continues. The answer to the question is that the state that is there, these are apparatuses to continue controlling, to implement the interest of the ruling party, but the nations believe there are other states. So when we bring together populism and national sovereignty, then it becomes too complicated, because all of them, they called for national sovereignty, but they say populism. To me, no, Kassis is not populist. He does not have the ability to realize national sovereignty, but the same symbolism of calling for that, it's important because the people who elected Kassis and they continue supporting him in this regard. As a president, is he populist? To me, he is not. So
I met Qais Sabawi in 2013, and I was sure he is not able to be a populist. He does not even have the characteristics to be a populist. Another point, it's important point. It's to demand for or request for a state that is provincial, especially two main services, health and education. This is an idea very powerful. Now, in the after the pandemic, it has proved to be that is a sector that has been given to the private sector, and maybe the only way where health system are not really affected is Sweden and Germany. However, in France, Italy, Spain, and these countries, even England, so the medical services there are very, very bad, and they're now linked to the educational system, because both of them, after this new liberal attack, these were hit. Their budgets have been mitigated and have gone down, and the COVID-19 has awakened this ideology, especially in the leftist European leftists. I'd like to add something to what Dalal has said, that we are witnessing the return of the system of the sponsoring state power, which it does not mean like the classical meaning of sponsoring country. It means that and it's not a patriarchal concept. It's like they want their governors to be their sponsors, and the new logic that there is a new need that had emerged in Tunisia, in Lebanon, in Algiers, that we don't like even to call it a patriarchal logic. It's a clear request. We have elected you to serve us. To serve us, it's a clear meaning. It does not have any patriarchal. Does not hold any patriarchal meaning. So we need choose the right words. Okay, last session of questions. Ayman, Nagam, Bara'a, and Rami. I'd like to conclude the questions. I will just brief them in one. Maybe in the last 30 years, societies have been reformed. The civil society, the transformations that Dalal has mentioned in the left, the transformations in the structure of a state, of course, the monopolizations. So there are different identities. People now see themselves in sects, factions, Shiite, Sunni. The national identity has have been retreated in the past 30 years, unlike in the 60s and 70s of the last century. So we see that there's a big amount of transformations and conflicts that came up with new coalitions, alliances that are not well-founded, or maybe opposing to what we need in order reform the world, or to have a new liberation scheme. How can we overcome these crises to come up with new formations, especially that the components of structures based on the fragmentation of societies and the social and the political and economic crisis will make it difficult to come up with new societies. And I don't, although I disagree with Dalal that there is no future, but we need to be helpful, and we need to really, although I agree with her, but we see that we need to design, even if we don't foresee it in the near future, we need to think of producing it from what we have, from the elements we have in our hands, and within these variables. So what are the things that need to be changed, and what is really achievable? I mean, from the formation or the population, or the priorities, maybe individual before the collective, or economic before the social, or social for economic. I know it's a complex, it's a very complex topic, but how can we like move from these structures that were formed in the neoliberal Arab situation? I'm asking both. Would you like to answer? Yes. Okay. This is a complex question. There's one thing I want to say, and it's something very important. The new social movements in the Arab world, or the horizon in other horizons in the Arab world, or in the West, and they all present the formation, and this is something that is absented from this discussion, in the discussion of the left, and everywhere. And this is in Lebanon and in Algeria. We see it's a problem. People are demonstrating to come down with the system, but the system does not come down because it's there's a political economic project that's being there, but and there are no real political movements that are able to restructure or to reform the powers. And this is a problem that happened in this new trend of new social movements. And since the traditional is the union social movements that in the 19th and 20th century that have formed important powers against the state today and nowadays. And as مثلا هناك civil rights movement that have regulated the new movement, which is based on individual rights before economic and social basis. We find that the same complex is existing in the Arab world. Civil society that is funded in mostly by donors, Western or other than Western, or the religious factions have increased, and they so the civil society that is funded by the foreign, it's and when there's a minority that are maybe ethnic or religious, and these are in competitiveness with the traditional, conventional, regulated parties in the unions. This forms a big problem, a big problem in the regulation on the one hand, and also it's theft that these horizontal movements is an entity that alone that can make the change, and that's why we try to answer this complex question. We need to reconsider what are the ways to regulate the system in order to create new powers, like lions. It's a social, a global movement. And then discussions about it. Well, Black Lives, it's a movement that have erupted in order to give back dignity to blacks around the world. So so this is it. So we wanted to see if it is true or not. Again, this presents prominently the regulation, the importance of regulation, the formations of regulation, the forms of regulation. I don't know in Palestine or not. So in Tunisia, and in the Tunisian case, the leftist movement in Tunisia, it's dead. I can say it's dead, because in parties and factions and discourse, everything, I think it's dead. There were social dimensions that were there on a plate of gold that were presented, but they did not invest in them. The leftist movement in Tunisia did not invest in this, and did not they won't even regain the power or even suggest an alternative project. Other problems related to that's not and unaware of the new changes and the social changes. So it's a left that is unable to analyze the culture and the cultural identity of the people, and superior discourse that people don't understand. People are not ready democratically, and we need to work on this. So this course, we forgot about this superior the discourse makes people don't feel good, and that they're not accepted, and that they don't accept the alternative. And when they see that the division is there, they agree. So it's not about regulation. What are the new horizontal tools of regulation? What are the classic parties? What is the alternative regulation that can help us? And the leftist discourse that is unaware of the changes, the social challenges and changes in the arena. And we could say this happens in France and in elsewhere. So I think this is a conclusive or a comprehensive, this happens in the Arab world. Mm-hmm.
I don't know if I need to say this, but I don't find a way now currently to do this. Even if we say it is an issue of organization or speech, if we don't do it horizontally then vertically, but vertically led to massacres. We did the democratic centralism, and the result was collapse. There is something that makes one go further than being about leftist and else. The root of evil of man against man. When they say evil, that man who can abuse and oppress man and violate their dignity and body is not that thing. The balance of power. If I want to measure the way that we are dealing in my area, it has never been internal, the balance of power. Always there are people who are ready to take over the state, but based on things that are not related to the internal requirements of the state. In Tunisia or Algeria, there is a complete people who want to rule, but unable, because when someone like Macron comes to them and tell them, okay, you do this. They continue implementing what he said. So much you feel there is a missing part, a missing ring there is something that is meaningless in that. This is the trap that we are facing. So I cannot say what we should do. I really don't know what we need to do. But I know that evil started since Adam and Eve, who God's that because he's a man and God loves him more. Then evil developed, and here we are. The experience of Sparta is the first experience for me. For me, Sparta's experience as I read, and that Spartacus is the liberator of slaves during the Roman Empire, and this resulted into Intifada, and he took the space, but the Roman forces attacked him, and he faced them with 6,000 people until Rome. This was before less than 100 years ago. If you read Spartacus' history, you don't see anyone other than those who wanted, always called to reform authority. But when they took the throne, they started acting with their subjects as if they were slaves. As gladiators, or those who playing with animals in the arena, fighting animals or playing with animals. I don't know if there is. What I mean is that every movement carries the seeds of failure and success, because if it succeeds, it will show. I'd like to add one thing, please. This is how when one faces such an attack. In Tunis, they were calling for the Tunisian democracy, not only Tunis, as Tunis is living in democracy. We have a war around us in Libya and Algeria, dictatorship. And people thought that Tunis is enjoying democracy. This is a fable. This is not true. And wars are there regionally. The problem, when, as they did with the, as those who fought the liberation movements in the 50s, these were based on popular solidarity. There was solidarity through, maybe now we have it in the social media, but the idea of political solidarity, how to recreate that between the nations, particularly considering the complete onslaught and attack on the region. This is another question that we need to answer along with the other questions that were asked. What are the means to resist a revolution? Or resistance cannot be important resistance, but how to build new other political ways for solidarity, especially in facing the issue of a deal of the century. People are going to the street in solidarity, but the missing part is the political one. That is how to turn this solidarity into a political support for the Palestinian cause. This is an important question. That is, if we want to think on a way to face this major crisis. Thank you. Thank you, Héla and Dalal. Maybe we can give a break to the public. Since 5 o'clock, we have been going on. The session was really great, and I'm really grateful for Dalal and Héla for their rich interventions and strong interaction that compensated a lot for this virtual distance. So we felt that we are closer, and we felt the thing more real. Thanks a lot for the public. Our major audience is over our YouTube channel. We have 2 channels, one in Arabic and one in English. We heard that we had a problem in translation. 2 voices were heard, but hopefully this is already settled, hopefully. And I need to thank Bettina, who is with us. She's the representative of the Heinrich Bull, who's supporting since more than 26 years. This is the 26th annual conference, and they continue supporting us. Very grateful to them. And I need to thank the interpreters and the Muwatin team, and the different technical issues were more difficult, and we are overcoming them. Now we meet tomorrow at in the second session, but before the second session, we at 11 o'clock, then the second session will be Dr. Lisa Taraki, where from Birzeit, Dr. Mustafa Kamel al-Sayed will be speaking from Palestine behind the wall. And the third session tomorrow evening at 5, we will stay tuned up for the meeting and have a good evening. The timing that I mentioned is Jerusalem time. The Jerusalem in Palestine, not in Tunis. Greenwich +3. I did not understand. When exactly? For you, Dalal, it will be 4 in the morning. So I suggest you skip it and you come to the afternoon session if you wish. Just like now. 5, so it's going to be 10 in the morning there, your time. Okay, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Have a good night. Thank you. Bye-bye.